Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1075 just came out, and this chapter confirmed that the arc is heading in a direction that I'm very, very excited for. Now, I've been saying I've been enjoying this arc for quite some time now, but this new sort of twist that we can say is happening in the, I suppose we would assume is the middle section of the arc, as we are kind of moved past the whole exposition and setup stage, and we aren't yet quite at the stage where we're going to get the finale with all of the big fights and everything like that we can assume is coming with the Marines around the corner. So it feels like we're kind of at the middle stage, right? The messy middle of every arc where things are supposed to start going wrong a little bit, at least in most arcs, and this would be the situation where the Straw Hats don't know what's happening, Vegapunks don't know what's happening, and basically they're being picked off in a sense, right? Not actually any, I don't know if anyone's actually going to die or anything like that, or even if a single Vegapunk body is going to die, but they are under attack, and there is some sense of fear at the moment that is probably going to start to build maybe a little bit for the middle section of this arc. Again, I don't think Egghead Island is going to be anything crazy or very heavy or serious or anything like that, but I do like that this middle section is getting a little bit tricky and complicated before we get to the final fights. The bigger reason that I'm really enjoying the direction that this arc is going is because we now have a murder mystery setup. And for any of you who know anything about me, who watch my streams or anything like that at all, you've probably heard me mention at some point that I love murder mystery setups. I love murder mysteries, I love whodunits, and I especially love situations where they all take place in a singular location with a decently large cast of characters all put into one spot and basically trying to figure out who the killer is, right? This isn't exactly that, right? We can cross off so many suspects right off the bat. We know it's none of the Straw Hats or anything like that. It's hard to imagine it being any of the Vegapunks at the moment because Shaka was the best guess that we had for a good while, and it just seems like it can't be him because otherwise why would he be pretending and faking to himself, speaking out loud to himself, the sense of surprise that someone is taking out the camera? It just doesn't make sense that he would be behind it. For most of the Vegapunk bodies at this point, it just doesn't make sense that it would be them, right? It's not York, as far as we can tell, right? It's not these characters, right? So for the Vegapunks, we're crossing off most characters. It's not a classic whodunit where everyone is a suspect or anything like that, but I just love that that's something that's being set up for this phase of the Egghead Island arc, because we don't usually get that in One Piece in this sort of scenario. The closest thing we had before this was who's the traitor, right? That discussion. Who is the traitor? Which one of the scabbards is it? Who in the alliance is the traitor? That was interesting, and that was something that was somewhat just an underlying thread that was going on in the background ever since the ending point of Zou, where it was first suggested that someone betrayed the alliance. So that's always been a sort of question mark that was kind of in the background, but it was in the backdrop of a lot of other events happening. This seems like it's going to be the singular focus, at least for the next, who knows, 1, 2, 3 chapters, I don't know, but at the moment, at least, like between last chapter, this chapter, maybe the next and the following chapter or something like that, we're gonna get to follow a little bit of a mystery. It does seem like it's most likely to be somebody that's not in the cast of characters that we know of so far, and my theories as to who that could be, because I think there's actually 2 routes of 2 very interesting options as to who could be behind this, and I think both are equally valid and both are equally interesting in their own ways. That's being saved for a video coming out this Tuesday, so definitely look out for that. But I don't know, I'm pretty interested in the 2 possibilities. If it's not these 2 possibilities, Oda's got something really mind-blowing cooked up or something like that, because it's just really hard to think who could be in this facility at this moment. That's not one of these 2 possibilities. That would make sense and fit everything that we know would need to happen for them to be able to accomplish this, and motive and everything like that. So I don't know, I love mystery stuff, okay? I just love mystery stuff. I know I'm gushing about that quite a bit, but murder mystery setup, I love it. Also, one of the big things that this chapter kind of changed my perspective on for me, that made me a little bit more amenable to the idea of, was, you guys might know I've been stating for a little bit that, okay, I'm not enjoying the fact that we're dealing with so many Vegapunk bodies, especially that last chapter where we had that huge panel that was so crowded with so many characters, honestly somewhat unneeded characters in my opinion, that are kind of crowding up the space and taking away from the opportunity to have more focused, significant dialogue, I would say, rather than things just bouncing around and characters just bouncing around bits of speech so that everyone gets their word in and everything like that. So to me, there was probably a point of diminishing returns when it comes to how many characters you're packing into a page, into a chapter, into a scene, whatever, right? And I think that it went past that. However, with things being split up and the fact that we're working with a sort of mystery sort of setup, now I do appreciate the fact that there are multiple Vegapunks to work with in this specific scenario, especially if this is just generally what Oda was building towards. So we'll wait and see a little bit how this plays out, but if this goes the direction that I hope it does, which is continuing to play out this sort of split up sort of groups of characters with a mystery sort of playing out, then I would be really appreciative of the fact that Oda thought that, okay, let me split up Vegapunk into multiple bodies. The reason being, if you try and have a sort of mystery setup where you want the characters to split off into their own ends so that different bits of information can be discovered by different parties, you do kind of need a sort of guiding force for each one of these groups that actually knows a little bit of what's going on. So it'd be a lot more difficult if, just Robin and just Robin and Chopper walking around or something like that, or just Sanji and Nami. Like, if it was just the individual groups by themselves of Straw Hats without a guiding force for each of them, then they're not really going to know what's going on as they're walking through this lab at all. They're going to have all these questions. They have no context for anything, right? So it's the Vegapunks that can kind of provide the context here that can make the mystery sort of develop in a more interesting way, right? Because we need the Vegapunks to spell out for us that, hey, what's happening right now is very abnormal. Okay, the Seraphim shouldn't be doing this. Okay, the only person that should be able to control the Seraphim is me or Vegapunk. Like, they need to be the ones that are coming to these sort of conclusions, because the Straw Hats did not come in equipped with any sort of knowledge for this situation. So I like the idea of multiple Vegapunks as a source of information for each of the Straw Hat groups to guide each of the main characters if we're going to be playing out this sort of setup where we've got a mystery developing, right? Let's wait and see where this goes, because again, I might be speaking too soon. Maybe in one chapter down the line, we know exactly who the killer is. Maybe the characters get reunited or something like that, and then I'm back to being like, okay, why do we need all these Vegapunks? But let's be positive. Let's hope that basically this continues to develop in an interesting way. And honestly, this is a good way to kind of get to know some of the Vegapunk bodies and those aspects of Vegapunk's personality a little bit better. This does lead me to one of the big popular ideas that's going around right now, which is that the Stella body, right, the main Vegapunk himself, he's the bad guy. He's the one orchestrating all of this. I actually put out a video a while back talking about, hey, Vegapunk himself might be the antagonist. He could be the antagonist of Egghead Island. I changed my mind on that for sure. I thought it was an interesting possibility initially. We have been given reasons to question not Vegapunk's intentions, but his means of getting there, because it's been established by multiple characters that he seems willing to do anything in the name of science. But at the moment, I'm not going to go so far as to say, yeah, Vegapunk is probably the person behind all of this at this point, just because it seems like a leap to me in many ways, even if initially it seemed like it could make sense to me. At this point, it seems like a bit of a leap. I think it would be a really cool, pleasant surprise if it turned out to be his doing and there was a good reason for it. But right now, I feel like we've learned so much about his character, and we've learned more about his intentions and everything like that, that it's harder to believe and really make sense of what his motivation to do all of this would be, to ask the Straw Hats for assistance, to get off the island, etc., and then actually be using that as an opportunity to attack them. And at the same time, why go to the lengths of trying to attack his own bodies and stuff like that, when he could, if he wants to finally pull the plug on that whole operation, wouldn't it just be time to reunite the brains back into his main brain? It just doesn't really follow to me for a lot of reasons, and one of the big kickers to me is that his conversation with Bonnie, his last conversation with Bonnie, it seemed very, very genuine. If he had malintent, why would he be telling Bonnie that, hey, I'm trying to spare your feelings by preventing you from finding out about Kuma's memories? Because as far as we can tell, he's being honest there, and what he's saying is valid. It seems like Bonnie is going to go through a very painful experience going through Kuma's memories and finding out the truth about why Kuma made the sacrifices that he did. So Vegapunk is genuinely trying to spare Bonnie from that sort of pain and heartache. It's hard for me to believe that, it's hard for me to believe that he's actually a very bad character deep down inside, because if he was trying to take out all of the Straw Hats and everybody, then wouldn't he be showing her, the red carpet straight to Kuma's memories and being like, have at it, and that'll distract you for some time for me to execute my master plan? I don't know. So, if Vegapunk turns out to be the villain, well, technically I called it right a while back, but I just don't feel like that same way right now, so we'll wait and see. The last thing to discuss is the ending scene, which is, I don't love the... Okay, here's what it is. The blind One Piece fan in me is basically saying, okay, cool. Luffy, Zoro fighting side by side with Lucci and Kaku, post-time skip. They've got awakenings and stuff like that. They're better at hockey now. They're teaming up against some villains. That's cool, right? So the blind One Piece fan in me, it's like, if you just wrote that down on a piece of paper and was like, here's what's happening this chapter, I'd be like, awesome, okay? The other side of me just feels that this is not a very organic setup. It feels very, very forced into I love the idea of, good guys being forced to team up with bad guys. That's an old trope, and it's an enjoyable one when it feels, to me, earned. I guess the simplest idea I would give is, for example, when they got Crocodile's assistance, right, in Impel Down. That was the first big instance of Luffy teaming, the big instance of Luffy teaming up with a former villain. Not a minor villain like Buggy, like at the start of Impel Down. This was a big time, hardcore villain, nearly killed Luffy 3 times. Heavy antagonistic relationship. I've argued in the past the most well fleshed out antagonistic relationship between Luffy and a villain over the course of the entire series was Luffy and Crocodile, outside of guys like Blackbeard and Akainu, who he hasn't gotten to yet, right? But you get what I'm saying. So for Luffy to suddenly be in a situation where he needs to rely on Crocodile, that was so interesting because it felt very earned, because the idea that, you've set up this dynamic between hero and villain, if you've made it a very powerful antagonistic dynamic, there should be some weight to that dynamic. And so that's what makes it so exciting when you set up a dramatic scenario or dramatic conflict where there is another obstacle or another threat that is so big and so daunting and so important that it makes the hero have to put aside that antagonistic relationship with the villain that in itself is so heavy and serious and actually join forces to take on this much bigger, more important conflict, right? That's what gives it so much, that's what gives moments like that so much weight, and it also puts into perspective how significant this other problem, the new problem the protagonist is facing is, right? So again, the Crocodile example is really cool to me because in this scenario, it was basically Luffy, he's by himself, right? He's by himself, he's going through Impel Down, the world's worst prison, and he's going to rely on anyone that he can. And he's going to do things that he's never done before. At this point, right, he'd already shaved off years and decades of his lifespan, risked his life many times, been to the brink of death with Magellan's poison, then Ivankov's miracle drugs and stuff like that. He'd gotten to the bottom of Impel Down, which was the end of his mission. He'd missed Ace, and he just decided that I'm going to do the unthinkable. You know what? Forget Impel Down. I'm going to go one step beyond that. I'm going to go all the way to Marineford, which was never in the agenda. I'm going to go all the way over there, and I'm going to go to basically the center of the world's biggest war for the sake of saving Ace, right? That was the magnitude of the conflict that they were presented with. They have to break out of Impel Down, which is basically impossible, and then try and get to Marineford, all for the sake of saving Ace, and that's how important that is for Luffy. And it was just such a insurmountable challenge, but such a meaningful, important challenge for Luffy, and that was the moment that we finally were introduced to the idea of like, well, if this is everything on the line for you, well then how far are you willing to go? Would you accept help from Crocodile in this situation? That's what made that situation so cool, that Crocodile's coming over to their side, because at this point, things are so serious, so important for Luffy, the stakes are so high, that this doesn't matter. As big of a problem and as big of an enemy and villain and terrible person Crocodile was, and Luffy wasn't even immediately okay with it, right? He tried to explain, no way, I can't let you out, you know how bad this guy is, right? The only reason they even accepted it was because Ivankov promised that she had some sort of fail-safe method to shut down Crocodile, or some sort of secret that could be used against Crocodile or held against Crocodile that could nullify the threat of the situation, right? But the point being, that was something that Luffy had heavy pushback against, and ultimately the fact that Luffy allowed Crocodile out and allowed Crocodile to give them a hand and accepted his help, that really put into perspective how big of a problem they're facing right now and how important this whole thing is for Luffy, that he's going to take help from Crocodile. And that's what made the whole Impel Down jailbreak, the finale of it, so interesting. You see Luffy with these characters you never would have imagined. Jinbei, who was set up to be a villain from way back when, right? We didn't know he was a good guy. Crocodile, who was maybe Luffy's most hated villain and personal villain up to that point. Then former friends like Bon Clay, former enemies again like Daz Bones, new characters like the revolutionary Ivankov. But that's what made it such a cool team up, right? I'm going on a tangent here at this point, but you get what I'm saying. To me, when you have the hero team up with the villain, the weight of that action matters a lot, because it's basically putting into perspective how significant, like you're taking the severity of what their dynamic once was and putting into perspective against what the new conflict is that would warrant something so major as a team up, right? All of that is to say that Lucci and Kaku, freeing them just for the sake of S-Hawk and S-Bear, where it's like, look, Luffy and Zoro together should probably be enough to take them fine, and there's an argument that Luffy should be able to take them fine just by himself. Now, that's not to underestimate S-Hawk. I've already talked about how the Seraphim might be being a little bit underestimated at the moment, but it's easy to forget that same S-Hawk gave Blackbeard, who is another Yonko just like Luffy in that same tier of strength, he gave Blackbeard a scare, right? I'm not saying Blackbeard would lose to S-Hawk as S-Hawk is right now, still in an undeveloped phase, right? But Blackbeard was, thrown off by how strong S-Hawk was, and again, that feat of cutting a mountain, that's nothing to laugh at, right? As strong as Luffy is, S-Hawk is still clearly a very, very, very strong character as well. Not in the same tier, I would assume, but, you know, just because you're a Yonko doesn't mean that you can easily take care of S-Hawk, as we've already seen with the Blackbeard scenario, right? Throw in S-Bear, Kuma, and it's probably a difficult situation for Luffy. But all I'm saying is that Luffy's also there with Zoro, right? It's Luffy and Zoro in this situation. So it's like, I don't want to get into difficulty. What should they mid-diff them, high-diff them? I don't know. But the idea that they would free Lucci and Kaku here for this, which a situation which just it's so far removed from something like, well, I've got to break out of Impel Down, the impenetrable or like unassailable prison basically that's no one's ever escaped from in like years and decades and stuff, and then go to Marineford to save my brother, right? That was the scenario that led Luffy to team up with Crocodile, and I would argue that Lucci is right up there with Crocodile's most important villains and antagonists for Luffy in the entire series, probably just a step or a hair below Crocodile's significance, right? So the casual nature of this is, I guess, basically, you know, even the comic face and stuff like that that's happening at the end of the chapter, it's just like, come on, guys, this is like Lucci and Kaku, like rereading Enies Lobby and the intensity of that conflict and everything like that, is that all that this gets? Like a gag face at the thought of like, well, guess we're teaming up now? I don't know, to take out, you know, 4v2 two Seraphims that they should be able to basically take either Luffy solo with some high difficulty or extreme difficulty, or definitely Luffy and Zoro together. I don't know. Maybe I'm splitting hairs over all this, but it's just the torn part of me, which is like the One Piece fanboy in me. It's fine. Like, I'll shut off my brain and just, I'll be happy to see the cool spreads of like Luffy and Lucci both awakened fighting side by side against whichever one of the Seraphim they're put up against. Zoro and Kaku doing some teamwork moves, who knows? Maybe Zoro and Lucci doing some teamwork moves, who knows? It'll be cool to see on page. But then at the same time, I just, reading the end of the chapter, I'm just like, seriously, this is what leads them to team up. Doesn't feel organic to me, I suppose, basically. But, you know, we'll take it. We'll get some cool action scenes and everything like that out of it. And the bigger thing that needs to be discussed is basically, one, maybe they don't actually do it. And two, if they do actually do it, right, maybe it's because some more Seraphim show up around the corner, and that actually prompts them to be like, okay, maybe we do need to pull these guys in for help, right? So, at the end of the day, I might be speaking too soon. Let's see how it goes next chapter. And even if they do just end up freeing Lucci and Kaku and they fight together, I'll enjoy the fight for what it is. So there is that. That's all for this video, and I'll talk to you all later.